She looked me dead in the eyes across her 18th birthday cake, the one I'd driven 40 minutes to pick up from her favorite bakery, and said it like she'd been rehearsing it for years. "The greatest gift you could ever give me, Julian, is if you just disappeared from our family forever." My wife, sitting right next to her, didn't gasp. She didn't defend the 8 years of my life, my income, and my energy poured into that household. She just nodded, looked at me with pure relief, and said, "Her real dad is back now. He'll take it from here." I sat there for exactly 3 seconds. Then I stood up, put my napkin on the table, and said, "Okay." Just like that. Okay. What happened in the weeks that followed, after I quietly sold the roof over their heads, canceled every financial arrangement I had ever set up for her future, and systematically dismantled our life without ever raising my voice. They never saw it coming, and honestly, neither will you. To understand how I walked away without screaming, you have to understand how my brain functions. I operate as a commercial real estate developer, a world where emotion is a liability and numbers are the only absolute truth. My entire career is built on analyzing risk signals, balancing ledger sheets, and deciding when a project has yielded a negative return on investment. I don't throw tantrums when a deal goes sour. I look at the data, cut my losses, and reallocate my capital. For years, I applied this exact same clinical, calculated logic to my personal life, believing that if I poured enough stability, structure, and resources into my family, the emotional return would eventually manifest. When I first met my wife, Chloe, she was a struggling single mother with a quiet, observant 10-year-old girl named Maya. Maya's biological father, a charismatic but utterly unreliable man named Marcus, had vanished into the ether years prior, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and unpaid child support. I didn't step into their lives looking to replace anyone, but I saw a structurally unsound foundation and decided to build something permanent, assuming that security would naturally breed loyalty. Our household ran on my rules of efficiency, which Chloe initially praised as a breath of fresh air after years of chaos. I established savings accounts, mapped out family vacations 5 months in advance, and ensured that every single bill was automated, so they would never know the anxiety of a utility being disconnected. Maya was a reserved child, someone who accepted my presence but rarely initiated affection, which I rationalized as a manifestation of her early childhood trauma. I told myself that love wasn't about tearful hugs or grand declarations. It was about the quiet, unglamorous work of showing up every single day. For 8 years, I treated her like my own biological asset, protecting her from the volatility of the world and ensuring her future was mathematically secure. Chloe always smiled when I presented my spreadsheets for Maya's future, calling me her rock, and I genuinely believed we were a unified front operating on mutual respect. Looking back, I realized I was treating a human relationship like a commercial development, completely blind to the fact that while my ledger was balanced, the emotional equity was entirely bankrupt. The investment I made into Maya's life was astronomical, not just in terms of currency, but in pure, unglamorous labor that no one else wanted to do. I was the one who woke up at 5 in the morning on freezing Saturdays to drive her to competitive swim practices, sitting in bleachers that smelled of chlorine while Chloe slept in. When Maya needed intensive orthodontic work, I researched the top specialists in the state, paying thousands out of pocket so she would never feel self-conscious about her smile. I bought her first car, a safe, reliably mid-sized SUV, and paid for the premium insurance policy that covered every possible liability. When her senior prom arrived, I handed Chloe my credit card without a second thought, telling her to ensure Maya had the exact dress she wanted, regardless of the price tag. I even went as far as establishing an unprompted, fully funded college trust under my corporate umbrella, ensuring she could attend any university in the country without a single dollar of student debt. These weren't gifts meant to buy her affection. They were infrastructure, the basic scaffolding I believed a responsible father provides to give a child a head start in a brutal world. Then, 6 months ago, the structural integrity of our family began to fracture when Marcus suddenly resurfaced, fresh off a failed business venture and looking for a redemption arc. He didn't offer to pay back a single cent of the years of back child support, nor did he offer to help with her upcoming college tuition. Instead, he brought fun experiences. He would roll up to our house unannounced in a rented convertible, taking Maya out for expensive sushi dinners, concert tickets, and flashy designer handbags that he undoubtedly bought on credit. Maya's entire demeanor shifted almost overnight as she began pulling away from me, treating our home like a hotel and treating me like an annoying live-in landlord. If I asked her to clean her room or be home before curfew, she would roll her eyes and mutter things about how this was my house, not her home, completely dismissing the years of stability I had provided. She stopped saying thank you when I handed her the allowance money, treating my financial support as a basic utility she was legally entitled to draw from, while Marcus received all the praise for simply existing. The betrayal deepened when I noticed Chloe actively managing information, filtering the reality of what was happening behind my back to protect Marcus's fragile ego. I would walk into the kitchen, and Chloe would instantly turn her phone face down on the counter, her face flushing with guilt as she cut off a conversation mid-sentence. When I confronted her about Marcus constantly hanging around our neighborhood, she waved her hand dismissively, telling me I was being overly analytical and paranoid. She began minimizing my authority in the house, dropping subtle, toxic comments during arguments, like, "You have to understand she's processing a lot, Julian, and at the end of the day, you're not her real dad." That phrase became her favorite shield, a way to invalidate my boundaries while ensuring my bank account remained wide open for whatever Maya needed. I watched my wife of nearly a decade slowly realign her alliances, shifting her loyalty back to the man who had abandoned her, all while using my hard-earned resources to fund their collective family fantasy. The culmination of this quiet disrespect came to a head on Maya's 18th birthday, an event I had meticulously planned and financed to celebrate her transition into adulthood. I had driven 40 minutes across town in rush-hour traffic to retrieve a custom 3-tier cake from the high-end bakery she had raved about for months, making sure every detail was perfect. In my jacket pocket sat a brand-new, top-tier laptop and an iPad Pro, thousands of dollars of technology intended to help her excel in her upcoming university courses. The dining room was decorated beautifully, but the atmosphere inside the house was thick with an uncomfortable, suffocating tension from the moment I walked through the door. Maya sat at the head of the table, flanked by Chloe, looking at the cake I placed down as if it were an insult rather than a celebration. There was no warmth in the room, no sense of shared milestone. It felt entirely like a trap, a stage carefully set for a performance they had been rehearsing behind closed doors for weeks. Maya blew out her candles with a perfunctory exhale, and before I could even reach for the cake knife, she looked me dead in the eyes with a cold, unblinking stare. "The greatest gift you could ever give me, Julian, is if you just disappeared from our family forever," she said, her voice steady, devoid of any teenage anger, carrying the chilling weight of a premeditated strike. The words hung in the air, vibrating against the walls of the dining room I paid for, slicing through the remaining illusions of our familial bond. I didn't blink. Instead, I slowly turned my head to look at Chloe, waiting for the inevitable correction, the maternal outrage, or at least a standard defense of the man who had raised her daughter. Instead, Chloe just sat there, her posture relaxing as she nodded in agreement, looking at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated relief that made my stomach turn. "Her real dad is back now," Chloe said, her voice completely flat, matching her daughter's chilling indifference. "He'll take it from here." I sat there, in total, absolute silence, for exactly 3 seconds, my analytical brain processing the data points with a speed and clarity I hadn't felt in years. In that brief window of time, the emotional fog cleared entirely, and I saw the situation for exactly what it was: an unprofitable venture that had completely wiped out its own equity. There was no point in shouting, no value in reminding them of the braces, the car, the college fund, or the countless mornings spent in the freezing rain at swim meets. To argue would be to negotiate for a seat at a table where I was actively despised, a massive concession of my personal dignity that I refused to grant. I slowly stood up from the table, unfolded my linen napkin, and placed it neatly next to the untouched birthday cake. I looked at both of them, my face an unreadable mask of corporate composure, and said a single word: "Okay." I turned on my heel, walked out the front door, and climbed into my car, leaving the expensive electronics on the counter and the keys to their illusion behind. Instead of driving aimlessly or drinking away my frustration, I checked into a high-end boutique hotel downtown, opened my laptop, and immediately began reviewing my personal balance sheet. I called my longtime corporate attorney, a man who handles my commercial acquisitions with a ruthless attention to detail, and had him pull up my prenuptial agreement before the clock struck midnight. The legal landscape was beautifully clear. The prenuptial agreement was ironclad, protecting all assets acquired prior to the marriage and keeping our banking completely segregated. Because Maya had just turned 18 that very day, she was legally an emancipated adult, meaning I had absolutely zero ongoing legal, ethical, or financial obligations to a person who had just formally requested my permanent exit. I sat at the desk in my hotel room, sipping a glass of scotch, and began systematically dismantling the massive financial safety net I had woven around their lives over the past 8 years. The first asset to be reallocated was the college trust fund, which I had wisely established under my own corporate holding company rather than an irrevocable educational trust. With a few clicks and a digital signature, I liquidated the account, transferring the substantial capital back into my primary real estate operating funds to prepare for an upcoming land acquisition. Next, I logged into our primary household account and canceled the automated weekly grocery deliveries, the premium streaming subscriptions, the landscaping services, and the weekly house cleaning contract. I called the utility companies and requested that my name be entirely removed from the accounts, effective at the end of the week, ensuring the financial liability would fall squarely on Chloe. Finally, I logged into my commercial insurance portal and canceled the premium coverage on the SUV I had purchased for Maya, leaving the vehicle entirely uninsured by the time the sun began to rise. The most significant lever I held, however, was the very roof over their heads, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial home in an affluent suburban neighborhood that I had purchased entirely in my name a year before I even met Chloe. The housing market was experiencing an unprecedented peak, with cash buyers routinely entering bidding wars for properties in that specific school district. I called a luxury residential broker I do business with, explained that I wanted the property listed immediately at a competitive price for a quick, headache-free liquidation. Within 48 hours, the listing went live, and by the 72nd hour, we received a clean, non-contingent cash offer from an out-of-state investor looking to close within 14 days. I accepted the offer without a moment's hesitation, signing the digital contract from my hotel suite while watching the sunset over the city skyline, knowing the legal clock was officially ticking for the residents inside. The quiet, calculated execution of my exit strategy created an absolute vacuum that my soon-to-be ex-wife didn't notice until the financial infrastructure began to collapse around her. The first wave of panic hit when the legal notice of the home sale and the subsequent 30-day move-out order was formally served to the house by a private courier. My phone, which had been blissfully silent for days, suddenly exploded with a barrage of frantic, minutes-long voicemails and text messages from Chloe that transitioned rapidly from confusion to desperate rage. She screamed into the receiver about how cold I was, asking how I could sell their home out from under them, completely oblivious to the fact that she had explicitly told me Marcus would take it from here. I didn't reply to a single text, nor did I answer any of her calls. Instead, I systematically routed her number, along with Maya's and Marcus's numbers, directly to my attorney's office, blocking them entirely from my personal line. On the final morning of the move-out deadline, after the movers had packed up my personal belongings and the house stood entirely vacant, I walked through the empty rooms one last time for a final walkthrough. The walls were bare, the echo of my footsteps bouncing off the hardwood floors, leaving the space looking exactly like the empty commercial shell it had returned to being. I walked into the kitchen, where the counters had been wiped down, and placed 3 highly specific, symbolic items neatly in the center of the island. The first item was the brand new laptop and iPad Pro I had purchased for Maya's birthday, left in their original unopened packaging to show that I always kept my word, even when the recipients proves entirely unworthy of the gesture. Next to the electronics, I placed a measured, typewritten letter detailing the reality of their new financial landscape, explaining that since they had requested my total disappearance, I was granting that wish with absolute, flawless perfection. The final item I left on the counter was an old, dust-covered framed photograph from our very first family vacation to Maine, taken 7 years ago when Maya was still small enough to sit on my shoulders. In the photo, we were all laughing, completely untainted by the bitterness, the manipulation, and the toxic reemergence of a biological father who only cared about the easy parts of parenting. I left the photograph facing upward, reflecting the morning sunlight, a stark and permanent reminder of the genuine love and stability they had so easily traded away for a ghost. I took one final look around the empty kitchen, satisfied that my ledger was clean and my dignity was fully intact, before locking the front door behind me. I handed the keys directly to the real estate agent waiting in the driveway, completely closing the chapter on a life I had spent nearly a decade building. It has been several months since that final walkthrough, and I am currently thriving in a stunning minimalist high-rise condo overlooking the harbor, a space that reflects my need for clarity, order, and peace. My commercial real estate firm is experiencing its most profitable fiscal year on record, largely because I have reallocated the massive emotional and financial capital I used to waste on people who viewed me as a utility. I have slowly begun opening myself up to dating again, setting incredibly strict boundaries, and looking for partners who value mutual respect over financial convenience. I didn't let the bitterness of their betrayal corrupt my worldview. Instead, I allowed the experience to refine my understanding of value, ensuring I will never again invest in a project that offers a negative return. From what my attorney tells me during our brief divorce updates, Marcus vanished again the moment the bills started piling up, leaving Chloe and Maya scrambling to find an affordable apartment they can barely maintain on their own. I often reflect on Maya's final words to me across that birthday cake, and I realize that her malicious attempt to break my spirit actually backfired into the greatest revelation of my life. Her asking me to disappear wasn't a punishment. It was a massive unintended gift that freed me from a life of quiet exploitation and psychological manipulation. It gave me my freedom back, protected my wealth from further erosion, and restored a profound sense of inner peace I hadn't realized I was missing for nearly a decade. The cruelest thing you can do to someone who genuinely loves you is to make them feel like their devotion, their sacrifice, and their care were never real. But I didn't lose anything in that dining room. I simply took my dignity, recalculated the risk, and walked out the door with everything that actually mattered. If you find yourself constantly redefining your self-worth downward to accommodate people who only value what you can provide, maybe it's time to stop negotiating for a seat at a table that doesn't want you there.